Last but certainly not least, a quick video on Julian of Norwich. I didn't assign her book, A Revelation of Divine Love, for this class because I find that often students have already read it. However, I'm going to talk about her briefly here, and I did put up a short reading from her. It is chapter 5 of her longer text, which is her famous vision of the universe as a hazelnut. The icon I have up is a representation of that vision, and I picked this vision because I think it is representative of her theology. You see both like the otherness and the greatness of God while also experiencing the love and care that God has for humanity. I also have an optional article that I wrote about Julian and Hildegard. I also have like a optional LibGuide with some like pictures of icons and the church at Norwich and stuff. So there are some extra things if you want to go a little bit deeper on Julian. We know very, very little about her. She was born 1342, 1343. So she was a child when the plague hit England, and the plague did hit Norwich really hard. She obviously survived, though. We don't even know her name. The name comes from the church where she was enclosed. Most scholars assume she grew up around Norwich, which was a pretty big and important city in England at the time, but that's speculation. People assume she was upper class because she can write well, but again, you know, it's a guess. We do know that she became very sick when she was 30 years old, and it was during this illness that she received 16 shewings in the original. And shortly after these visions, she wrote down her shorter text, which was the visions. And then after years of theological reflection, she wrote her longer text. If you pick up A Revelation of Divine Love to read it, the book should have both texts. Though the longer text is probably the one you want to read. We actually don't know what she was doing before she had these visions. There are scholars who argue that she was already a Benedictine nun, and others argue that she was a wife and mother, but she lost her family. I don't really feel confident enough to argue one side or another, honestly. So at some point, though, she was enclosed in an anchor hold, and she stayed there at least until the year 1416. She may have been there longer, but that is the last historical reference we have placing her there. The painting I have up is an artist's rendition of the cell. I don't think it's super accurate, but what I do find interesting and what I think the artist does really well is show how she was both isolated, but how she also wasn't. Her anchor hold was in a busy space, and she continued to interact with people, yet she was physically isolated from them by like literal walls, right? Regarding her written work, she does not talk about things like purgation, illumination, and union in her writing. She doesn't claim to have joined with God. She writes about her visions, which are really very remarkable because she believes that's what she's supposed to do. And her message is one of love and comfort, all right? She isn't involved in politics. She isn't producing a guide for others to follow so they can reach union with God. So in this regard, she is somewhat unique. In kind of the list of historical figures that we have studied for this unit. One final kind of fun fact, Dr. Paget told me she's the first person to have written a book in the language that we would call English, though she may have been the first woman to write the first English book. Regardless, it's a really early Middle English book compared to, you know, like Beowulf or something that was written in Old English. I have looked through the original Middle English version of A Revelation of Divine Love, and you can make your way through it, especially if there's like footnotes and things. But I would say it's significantly more difficult than, say, something like Shakespeare. And if you were going to read it, I would get a modern translation. All right, that's it for Julian and also for this unit in general. Julian brings us almost up to the Reformation, which will be the topic for next week. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, thanks, everybody.